If you're just joining us, we are here today for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative's Thought Leadership Series. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm the Reentry Services Program Director at Goodwill Industries International, but I'm also the Thought Leadership Series lead here at the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative and a member of the steering committee. For those of you who don't know, the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative was formed about almost 3 or 4 years ago from a single meeting where several of us intermediary organizations, we're all organizations that provide services to community-based organizations met because we were awarded a similar Department of Labor grant. Together, we have worked throughout the last 3 years under the leadership of Jason from the Latino Coalition, who you'll meet in just a minute, and have been able to build this wonderful community where we're all working together to highlight and lead in best practices and approaches in reentry workforce. If you're just joining us, please go ahead. A couple last reminders before we get started. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat pod. Today with us in the Thought Leadership Series, we have several really wonderful speakers who will be joining us, or panelists. We'll have Brittany Murrey, who's the Director of Workforce Advisory Services from the Center of Employment Opportunities. We'll also have Ritchie joining us today. He's a Senior Director of Reentry and Youth Services at Goodwill Industries of Kentucky. And then also Harley Blakeman, founder and CEO of Honest Jobs, will be joining us today as well as a panelist while we discuss effective strategies for employer engagement. I think what's really great about all of our panelists today is they have different perspectives, different experiences, and there's going to be a lot that we learn together. We have just under 1 minute until we get started with our main content today. So one last reminder to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat pod before we get started. I just want to say welcome to Michael, to those who are coming to us from Oxford House. Brent, thank you, Angel, for joining us, who's joining us from the Palmetto Goodwill in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you, Tess, for joining us. I have so many people introducing themselves in the chat pod. I can't quite keep up, but please know that we welcome and are appreciative of you spending your time here with us today. If you're just joining us, please go ahead, introduce yourselves in the chat pod. We'd love to know your name, what your job title is, what company you represent, and what region across the country you come from. This helps us gauge what impact we're having across the nation and who we have with us in our room today so that we can tailor a provoking thought leadership series today for you. And with that, I believe we're at 1 p.m. and we'll get started in just a couple seconds. So with that, I would like to just go ahead, one last time remind you, introduce yourselves in the chat pod, and we are going to officially go ahead and get started with the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative's Thought Leadership Series on effective strategies for employer engagement. And with me today, joining us is Jason White from the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership. Jason is the Director of Partnership Strategy at the Latino Coalition, but more importantly for today's purposes, Jason is our chairman at the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and welcome us all here, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It is a privilege to be here today. And I just want to take a quick moment to say welcome everyone to the 4th session of our Thought Leadership Series. Thank you for joining us. This 4th session is significant because it means that we would have covered 1 year of content. So we've been providing value through the Thought Leadership Series to the field for 1 year now. So that's super exciting for us to consider. Now, in this session, if this is your first time, the Thought Leadership Series is really our way of facilitating continuous learning in the field. Every quarter, we get together on one national platform to really share leading practices, strategies, and approaches that are really making an impact in the field. Now, our topic for today in this session is effective strategies for employer engagement. Now, this is a very timely topic because, as I'm sure you know, wherever we go today, we see the sign, we're hiring. Now, many employers are finding it very, very difficult to fill vacancies across the country in this very challenging job market. As of July 2021, there were over 10 million job vacancies that were available across the country. However, there is really an untapped labor force that can really address the solution. And this labor force consists of individuals who have been impacted by the justice system and face many barriers to employment. Now, I know that I'm talking to the choir here because many persons on this call or organizations that are represented have committed to work tirelessly to prepare these participants to be placed gainfully in employment and economic mobility within the labor force. Therefore, we're really excited to have these three presenters today to share from their experiences, different approaches that they have actually used to build transformative relationship with employers across the country and really open doors for career and economic mobility for persons who have been impacted by the justice system. Now, our host today is who you've been hearing, Jennifer Lynch. Jennifer is our Thought Leadership Series lead. So we're excited for Jennifer to lead this session. She's also, as she said, the Reentry Services Director for Goodwill Industries International. Now, before I hand off to Jennifer, I'd just like to highlight two things for your consideration. First, at the end of the session, we will be announcing the next topic for our upcoming session next quarter of next year. And after the announcement, you will be receiving a pop-up on your screen that indicates that there is a survey. We would love for you to take a few minutes to share your thoughts on how this session went. We really want to hear from you. We also want to hear what topics you would like us to cover in future session. Please do stick around and share your response. Your voice is important to us. So Jennifer, without taking out any more time, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you for your leadership throughout the last several years. We are so grateful for you and your contributions.
You're welcome.
And with that, if you're just joining us, welcome. We are here today for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative Thought Leadership Series, and we are going to be discussing effective strategies for employer engagement. Today, joining us, we have three panelists who all have three very unique and distinct perspectives on employer engagement. We'll be first hearing from Dennis Ritchie, who's a Senior Director of Reentry and Young Adult Services at Goodwill Industries of Kentucky, based in Louisville. We'll also be hearing from Harley Blakeman, founder and CEO of Honest Jobs, and Brittany Murrey, who's the Director of Workforce Advisory Services from the Center of Employment Opportunities. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Each of our presenters are going to give a quick introduction to their experience in working with different employers in their line of work, and then we'll go into some panelist questions. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and invite Dennis on camera with me. And Dennis, we'll go ahead and get started with your presentation. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. And good afternoon, everybody from Louisville, Kentucky. Hope everybody is doing great today and looking forward to the weekend. So as Jennifer said, my name is Dennis Ritchie. I'm the Senior Director of Reentry Services and Young Adult Services for Goodwill Industries of Kentucky. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself before I go into the presentation. You can go to the next slide, Emily. So my background, I grew up in a blue collar family. I was not disadvantaged by any stretch of the imagination. I went to undergraduate at Bradley University and graduated with a BS in finance. And then I went to law school at the University of Kentucky and got my law degree. I practiced law in Western Kentucky for about 12 years. Almost 13 years, and primarily was a criminal defense attorney. I had a car accident and was going through a divorce all about the same time and developed a substance abuse issue that caused my life to spiral out of control. With that, I got into some trouble. I was charged with a criminal offense. I lost my bar license. And as a result of that, went to inpatient rehab. And when I got out after 90 days, for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. So I found out the struggles that I never knew existed for people with backgrounds and people who needed a second chance. So even with my law degree, I had a hard time finding any kind of work. We know people have families and people have bills, and that's not a great thing. So I developed for myself a pathway out of that and a pathway back to where I'm at today. My current wife also was just as involved, and I helped her, and as much as she helped herself, also develop a pathway out and back to sustainability. And here we are now, as I said, as the senior director, and I want to give back to other people, to the communities, some of the stuff that I think I was fortunate enough to be given back, and that's a second chance. So why is employer engagement important at Goodwill? Well, I want to tell you a couple things about Kentucky to start with. That Kentucky has the third lowest workforce participation rate in the nation. As of June of 2021, we were ranked 48th among the 50 states. And to meet future demand for the labor market in Kentucky, it's projected that we have 2.4 million job openings between now and 2028. So the employment base has to grow by 6%, and we're already having issues with employment. Also, I want to note that the employment rate of formerly incarcerated individuals in Kentucky is extremely high. It's about 27%. Kentucky is always among tops, the dubious tops in the nation in incarceration rate. So that unemployment rate for formerly incarcerated individuals does not surprise me. So what do we do at Goodwill? You can go to the next slide, Emily. So up on the screen, you will see what I call the Goodwill Works process. And what this is the beginning of Goodwill getting people who need a second chance, who are just as involved, employable. So it's the start of transformative relationships with employers for us at Goodwill. You'll see on the screen, I'm going to talk more about soft skills and Good Start and Rise next, but a process that we go through that involves job readiness and then working on barriers and creating a go plan with people to get them on the pathway to success. Go to the next slide, Emily. Here's a little bit more about that process that I was telling you about. So the process is soft skills, Good Start, Rise, and then customer service as option. So soft skills is 6 core modules that we found that employers in Kentucky would like to see the most in people they employ. Attitude, team building, dependability, conflict resolution, self-presentation, and safety. When individuals complete this, we give them a $50 stipend. I've just found that stipends are necessary. It allows individuals to do things they might not otherwise have been able to do. They might have had to have gone to an employment agency and got that temp job. Now they can go through our process and be more employable and more ready for a career path. I don't want a temp job. I want them to be in a career. So after soft skills, they go to Good Start. And Good Start is the assessments, the career navigation, and the start of barrier reduction that the coaches do to find out what the needs of participants are. When they graduate from Good Start, it takes about 20 or 25 hours, they get a $100 stipend. And then they're eligible for Rise. In Rise, we do a number of things. It comes with a $150 stipend for the young adults, and adults a $300 stipend. But you see on the screen some of the things we do. It's a pretty intense boot camp, personal branding, career pathways, financial education, digital literacy, relationship building, putting people on the track to being self-sufficient. The most important part about Rise is it's a class that develops hope and empowers the individuals to be something better and take advantage of their second chance. And then after they do all that, if they like, they can complete customer service, which is optional. I think customer service is important because it's really communication skills, and every job, every employer wants their employees to have good communication skills. You go to the next slide, Emily. And so then I'm going to get into barrier reduction. So with this process, Goodwill has placed barrier reduction as a priority. Placements are still important, but we do placements second. So we go to the next slide, Emily. And the way that we measure barrier reduction at Goodwill for the participants, you see on the screen, the 10 most prevalent barriers, they go from crisis to empowered. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to use one as an example. Housing is a barrier that we see all the time that's extremely important. A lot of times when people come in to see us, participants are at a 1 or a 2. We know that when we can get somebody to a 3 or a 4 on this matrix, that they're much more likely to be able to not only gain employment, but to maintain that employment and move on. So the goal is to get them to a 3 or a 4, and then continue them on to their career path. And then hopefully they become empowered at some point. So that's what our coaches are working on all the time for these participants. And that's, I think, a value to the employers that Goodwill Industries of Kentucky gives. If you come to us, you know that you're going to have the benefit of a coach for life. It's going to continue to work on these barriers and make sure that they have a sustainable and a productive employee. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dennis, so much for the great introduction to the services and how you guys really feature and focus on barrier reduction at the Louisville Goodwill. With that, we are going to go ahead and transition to our next presenter. Harley Blakeman is the founder and CEO of honestjobs.co. For those of you who are not familiar, honestjobs.co is an online job portal or website that helps individuals impacted by the justice system find employment. There's a lot of great features. If you've not checked it out before, I highly recommend that you do. But Harley, today you're here to talk to us about employer engagement, and I'd love to hand it off to you. Thank you for your time today and looking forward to learning alongside you.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Jennifer. And thank you to everyone who's joined. It seems like a great presentation so far. I've already taken some notes from Dennis. Hopefully you guys will enjoy my short introduction here and brief presentation. Again, my name is Harley Blakeman. I am the founder and CEO of honestjobs.co. So we are a free online employment resource for employers, as well as formerly incarcerated job seekers or anyone that has a criminal record, rather that be felony or misdemeanor. Our one-liner as a company is we help people with criminal records find employment fast, or I guess you may see it somewhere, we help people impacted by the justice system find employment fast. So that's what we do. I like to share a little bit about my backstory. I have a company now with 5 employees. We have investors. We work with hundreds of employers to help them tap into this population. But the reason why I do what I do and why our team does this so passionately is, I have lived experience. I grew up in North Central Florida. I lived in a trailer park. I had a very small, uneducated family, and I am the first person in my family who eventually went on to college. But that was after many missteps early in my life. So growing up in a trailer park, my mother actually divorced my father when I was 13, and then my father passed away when I was 15 in a motorcycle accident, and that left me as a homeless teenager. Wasn't sleeping under a bridge or anything, but I was living on couches, bouncing around from house to house, and ultimately it just made for a really bad situation. My grades declined. I actually just like a week ago found out that I'm dyslexic, so I didn't have medical. I wasn't like seeing doctors regularly. So my grades were already suffering, but when my father passed, they really declined. And I ended up dropping out of high school at 16. I think it was 9th grade. And with all of my free time, I was just hanging out with other high school dropouts or adults that were not the best role models for me. So I started abusing drugs pretty heavily, partly due to depression from my father passing away and my mother not being in my life, but also partly because, an idle mind is the devil's playground. That's what I learned in prison. People told me that, so it makes sense. And I went on to sell drugs, and then I started selling more and more drugs when I was 17 and 18. And right after my 18th birthday, I was arrested and convicted of drug trafficking in Savannah, Georgia. It was my first time ever being arrested, but I was ultimately sentenced to 14 months in prison with about another 8 years of parole after that. And when I got out, actually, while I was in, some of the things people never really talk about is that it actually helped me. Like, prison didn't make me worse. It helped me. I had very little opportunity in prison. All we had was a library and a church. We didn't have we didn't have college courses. We didn't have coding boot camps, but I did read like 60 books in 14 months, and I earned my GED. And literally other inmates in prison convinced me that I should go on to college and pursue a degree. So when I got out, I moved to Columbus, Ohio. That's where my only real distant relative was. Went to community college for a year. Then I transferred to Ohio State University, where I ended up graduating with honors from the business school, top of my class. So you think I had proven myself. I worked a full-time job, went through college, graduated with honors. 5.5 years after my release from prison, every single company rejected me. I interviewed with over 75 companies and I graduated unemployed. This was in 2017. And the thing I want to point out is, I was a white male with a good education and a support system, and I was rejected all those times. So the idea that people coming home from prison can just like work hard and they'll overcome is really not true. But that will transition into kind of the next points, is like why right now is such a special time, is we actually are at a time in history where people do have the opportunity to get a foot in the door, where as short as 3 years ago, it was much, much harder. You could graduate with honors and people would still look you over. But a little bit about Honest Jobs is I created Honest Jobs because of that reality. Like, I went through this situation and what I found out was it was not unique. Everyone coming home from incarceration is struggling. And even if you do what I did, you're still going to struggle. So that inspired me to pursue this. And what Honest Jobs is essentially is we're a job board that's free for employers and for job seekers, 100% free. And we work with about 550 companies across the US, including very large companies like Amazon, Pepsi, Gap, Owens Corning, Coke Industries, and a slew of small mom and pop shops all across the US. We do have some states where we have a stronger presence, like Texas, Colorado, Kentucky's a good one, Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, Florida. But we do have jobs all across the country in every state. And again, I want to iterate, it is free. Community-based organizations can actually create an account as well. We have accounts for job seekers, employers, and support and supervision. So if you're a support and supervision professional, please create an account. And the reason why employer engagement is so important for Honest Jobs, and really for everybody, is the Brennan Center's research, I believe it was last year, came out that showed formerly incarcerated people in America lose $77 billion a year in annual earnings. So because they were arrested or convicted of a crime, collectively, people with criminal records in America lose $77 billion in annual lost earnings. And these lost earnings are coming from people who are already in poverty, people who already have barriers to entry, people who already have biases against them. So it's keeping people who are already at a disadvantage into a further disadvantage. So that's what really inspires us. That's what makes us motivated to get thousands and thousands of employers hiring people, so that when people come home and they want to work, they can start working right away, so they can feed their families, create a safer community, and ultimately help everybody prosper in the whole community. So thank you so much. That's my intro, and excited to hear the rest of the panel and discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, Harley, thank you so much. And I just want to give a shout out to one of the features of Harley's platform. There is an actual logistical algorithm that he uses that helps individuals identify if this is a good fit for them or not, based off of their record. I find that this tool is so useful and so important for those individuals that most community-based organizations serve, who are impacted by the justice system, because we know how frustrating it is to apply for jobs that are not going to consider you. Our time is worth money. Their time is worth money. And this tool really helps people pinpoint positions that are a really great fit for them. So just wanted to take a moment to highlight that feature of honestjobs.co. Again, if you're not familiar with it, please go ahead and visit his platform. But just as excited as I was to share with you Dennis and Harley, I'm really interested in learning from Brittany today as well. So please join me in welcoming Brittany here. Brittany joins us from the Center for Employment Opportunities. And Brittany, I'd love to hear your perspective in regards to employer engagement, and just look forward to speaking a little bit more with you in a little bit. So go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Brittany. I joined the Center for Employment Opportunities, otherwise known as CEO, in January of 2009. Currently, I reside in Southern California and have previously worked in the financial services sector. Throughout my career, I've held a variety of business development roles. Right now, I'm serving as the National Director of Workforce Advisory Services, working directly with large employers to implement inclusive hiring pathways through a variety of services and a framework geared to support candidates with employment barriers tied to past convictions. Just a little background on CEO. Our mission is to provide immediate, effective, and comprehensive employment services to folks with criminal convictions. Our core workforce development program helps participants regain the skills and confidence needed for successful transitions to stable, productive lives. CEO believes every person returning from incarceration should have the opportunity for full participation in society and receive the support needed to achieve social and economic mobility in a way that really gives them agency and aligns with their own personal goals. And so we enact this through a variety of services, but our core programming has been our transitional work crew model we deploy at every site that enables us to train our participants while on the job and provide them a daily wage, really a mentorship model. The direction of our work over the last couple of years has been to shift the paradigm in employer practices and widen the pathways to employment in a variety of industries for job seekers with past convictions. Our inclusive hiring department is largely focused on deploying scalable frameworks and systems to help employers tap into this talent pool with ease, while also supporting candidates and being mindful of their experience as applicants. So ethics is a big part of this work. On the ground, the work looks like forging critical partnerships with community partners and service providers to support the needs of justice-impacted job seekers and work together to eliminate as many employment barriers as possible. It also looks like developing tools and systems that can be scaled across markets and state lines. And so, just to wrap up, I'm so very excited to be here on this panel and speak to this audience about employer engagement strategies and practices and the ways in which we can build more champions around this work and foster a more equitable future for all individuals. So I'll take it back to you, Jennifer.
Brittany, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us and sharing your different levels of expertise. I'd love to invite all three of our panelists, Harley, Dennis, and Brittany, to join me back on screen as we work through some questions that we have prepared in advance as we really focus and do a deeper dive into employer engagement. So at this point in time, you've all gotten a brief introduction into Brittany, Harley, and Dennis's work, but now we're going to take a deeper dive into this idea of employer engagement and what are the most effective strategies that we can all use. So the first question that I have, I'm going to go ahead and talk to Harley for a minute and broach this question with you is, why is it important for us to be talking and thinking about this topic? And is there anything important or special about the times we're living in? I heard you mention that during your introduction and had to bring it up. But so if you could go ahead and share with us, why is this topic so important in today's age?
Yeah, there is definitely something special about the times, and that's why it's so important that you guys are having this discussion now. And basically, I've bullet pointed about 6 different things that are really kind of major trends we've seen over the last, since the pandemic, but really some of this was happening pre-pandemic, and then a lot of it was accelerated during the pandemic, like many things were. The first major trend that we've noticed that's empowering us to get more employers engaged, right? We engage with almost 600 employers. One of the original kind of trends was just corporate social responsibility. So like millennials really wanted companies to do more than just make money and provide a job. They wanted them to be a part of the community. They wanted them to care about the impact they have on people. So that was an early trend. We saw people like Ben and Jerry's who were very willing to say that what they care about. It's a fine line pushing employers to have a voice on every single issue, but when you ask employers to invest in their community where they have hiring needs, that's something that they can really support. Typically is supporting the community in which they have a facility that they're looking to hire people. There's a direct business need there. The other one was pre-pandemic was the Society for Human Resource Management launched the Getting Talent Back to Work effort, which was led by Johnny C. Taylor. He is a Black man, and his brother is a Black man who's a head of human resources for a very large company who was doing second chance hiring. And he felt it on his heart that it was a topic he could speak up about as he was the CEO of the largest HR organization in the world, the Society for Human Resource Management. It was very well received. He encouraged employers to sign a a statement saying that they would do everything they can to advocate for formerly incarcerated people through the hiring process. And then in the pandemic, they came out with the Getting Talent Back to Work certification, which I know CEO is a big part of. Every employee at Honest Jobs has actually taken that certification, and we are trained and certified thanks to CEO and Society for Human Resource Management for creating that certification. But it speaks to the fact that this was top of mind for HR professionals this past year, but also the year prior. It was socialized with them and it was top of mind. So for anyone who wanted to participate, they had the resources and the social validation that they could. So that was actually a really big one. And then of course the pandemic hit. There was terrible things happening all around the world, but there was also a lot of social unrest and really bad things happening to people of color in the community all across the country. And when the protests happened, companies all over the United States announced that they were putting lots of money into DE&I programs. Honest Jobs, we knew early on, they're gonna find out quickly that there's barriers people of color face in a disproportionate amount compared to, who they were vastly hiring from before. And over the last 6 months, we have seen more and more diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, including formerly incarcerated, in that budget, and trying to find ways to include this as a underrepresented population. And that's really great for us too, because we actually have contracts with companies where it was the DE&I department that we started the conversation with. So it just opened up more doors and more opportunity to get your foot in and have a real conversation. Wrapping it up here, but another big one was Jamie Dimon starting the Second Chance Business Coalition with over 36 Fortune 1000 companies were committed publicly to hiring. What we noticed was a lot of companies want validation that they're not alone in doing this. So that's why this was so big, is we would have companies say, well, do you have another large retailer who's already doing this successfully? And if we didn't have someone to point to, oftentimes that was the end of the discussion. The Second Chance Business Coalition is a great way to go to companies across many industries and say, here are leaders that have great reputations they have to protect. They have very thorough legal teams who have said, let's do it. You can do it too. So that was really valuable. And then obviously the most important one, the most timely topic, is the tight labor market. Obviously there's a tight labor market. I wouldn't even say it's tight labor market, so many people are unemployed, but there's a lot of mismatch happening where people just can't seem to find someone to fill the job, even though there's thousands of unemployed people. It's the perfect storm right now between all those things I pointed out, and probably so many more. But those are some of the key drivers that when we're talking to employers, we're able to get them engaged quickly because we can point to those things. Sorry if I went over.
Harley, that was great. You touched upon so many timely topics, and I can't recommend enough the Getting Talent Back to Work toolkit. It's linked in the chat pod. Thank you to Ken, who's been on top of it and adding links in for us as we go. We appreciate your help. I've also included the link there for the Second Chance Business Coalition as well, which has also been a big milestone that was hit in the last year. We're going to go ahead, and I have a question for each of you. And I'm just really curious to hear the difference among your experiences and what strategies work for you and your organizations when we talk about employer engagement. So just to be organized, we'll start with Brittany, go to Dennis, and then finish up with Harley. What are 3 strategies for employer engagement that you've seen work effectively? So Brittany, if you don't mind starting us off, what's worked well for CEO?
That's such a great question. And I'm happy to share some of our learnings on it. The biggest thing is making the business case. We're at a point in time where effective recruitment and retention strategies are vital to the overall success and health of businesses, given the current labor climate. Being able to deliver seamless frameworks for businesses to tap into talent pipelines that are being cultivated by seasoned community stakeholders brings incredible value. Among that is the ability to help them reduce costs associated with turnover through effective retention strategies, and really a refined workplace culture that is inclusive and safe for all types of folks. I would say next is building champions. So this is important both internally and externally, actually. Internally, you want there to be multiple individuals on a variety of teams that are engaged in the prospect of working to build successful talent pipelines for job seekers with employment barriers. So that could look like seeking buy-in from teams like human resources, corporate social responsibility, philanthropy, operations, and really any department that would potentially be a part of a hiring pilot or initiative. Externally, you should be building champions that will validate the need for these types of investments and support them in critical ways. For example, some of these intermediaries are community colleges, chambers of commerce, workforce development boards, and many other entities that are vital stakeholders in this work. Just got to really make sure they are brought into the conversation early on. Lastly, I would say having an effective communication strategy. When executed correctly, this is extremely helpful. Before an employer ever reaches out to you, what have they learned through their own reconnaissance about your organization? Is your mission clear? Does your impact to date enhance your credibility? Would your previous partners recommend working with your organization? It is very important to control that narrative and be effective at using data to tell a compelling story. There's so many other things I can chat through, but I think, again, just to recap, making the business case, building champions, and having an effective communication strategy are three main points that I want to highlight here.
Brittany, thank you so much for those points. I identify with so many of them. Finding the champion is a strategy that we use across the board in so many different projects that we use. But the clear communication plan, it seems like such a simple concept, but the deeper you get into it, the more complicated it gets. And like, as you're speaking, I was thinking about like search engine optimization, which is something I'm sure Harley is really familiar with, trying to launch an online business, right? But how are we creating that for ourselves prior to our partners even getting to our front doorstep? What are they learning about us when they Google us for the first time? And if that's something that your organization or you as an individual are not looking at, it's something that's really important for us to consider. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and head over to Dennis. Dennis, what are 3 strategies for employer engagement that you guys leverage at Goodwill Industries of Kentucky and Louisville?
And Jennifer, I want to talk about one in particular that I think is extremely important, and it hinges around the stats that I gave at the beginning of the presentation in my introduction, that employers can't find employees as it stands right now. And in 6 years, it's estimated that in Kentucky, we're going to have another 2.4 million job openings. And the reason why they can't find employees right now is because they're not tapping into the right labor market. So they're not utilizing second chance individuals, people with substance abuse disorders, and people with backgrounds. And the reason why they're not is because they're not educated properly on the needs and the barriers that these employees may have when they come to work for them. So if they happen to take in these individuals, they're not equipped to deal with those problems. And as such, then the individual is not going to be able to maintain their job. Something's going to happen, they're going to leave. And so to deal with that, I think what we've done at Goodwill, as I said, the barrier reduction first and the placement second. So what we've got to offer when we're doing employer engagement and making these relationships with employers is that we have a whole plan now around barrier reduction. We can educate you on the barriers that you're going to see for justice involved individuals. And we have a relationship with the individual that we're going to maintain for life. And we're not only going to educate you, but we're going to help your employee to get through those barriers while they're working for you, to make that employee sustainable and make it possible for them to grow and flourish in their job. I just think that as it stands right now, that there's not enough, most employers do not realize the depth and the extent of the barriers, especially the justice involved individuals face. And so they're not equipped to deal with it. By giving a career coach to a participant that goes through our Goodwill process for life, can tell that employer then that we are going to stand by this employee. If you give them a chance and something happens, please call us. Let us be involved in the process. Let us try to work out that barrier with the person. Instead of don't terminate them immediately. Contact us. Let us work with them. See if we can get an explanation and a resolution for it and work through that problem. So, that was the main point that I had for this question, Jennifer. I think it's a big deal that we're able to tap into this market, continue to educate employers, and also offer assistance to them that they're not prepared to give themselves.
Yeah, Dennis, thank you so much for bringing that up. As you know, we've worked together for about 4 years now, and there are very few organizations out there that do barrier reduction as well as the Louisville Goodwill does, Goodwill Industries of Kentucky. And I just really appreciate the way that you, as an organization, approach holistic reintegration services, that services don't stop at placement, that we recognize that there's additional support that's needed, and how you communicate that to employers, that that's available, so that we don't cut people's chances short before they've even had an opportunity to thrive, and to help them overcome those barriers. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And Harley, you're up next. You're in a little bit of a different perspective here. Both Brittany and Dennis are coming from organizations that are providing services to individuals who are involved with the justice system, where they're able to support and stabilize. But you're offering a service specifically that connects them to employers. So what strategies do you use for employer engagement in daily across your work?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, going last made it hard because Brittany gave some of the key fundamentals of like engaging employers as the business case. Obviously, like, you can't stress it enough. We've heard it over and over again by thought leaders in the space that like this can't be a charity initiative. It needs to be a business case. So that's baked into some of the things I say here. And Dennis, I thoroughly agree that helping them understand barriers is also important, but I have a different take on some of this stuff. So we are a for-profit social enterprise that sells mostly to for-profits. We're giving them a solution. We're trying to educate them on it. And we do make some money. I know I said it's free for job seekers and employers, but about 12% of our employers opt into paying us. Sometimes that is actually for supportive services that are ongoing after the placement. So we do have some knowledge of that as well. And that's really how we survive, is doing that. But what I want to say is, don't waste their time. When you're talking to employers, do not waste their time, because you're messing it up for CEO, you're messing it up for me, you're messing it up for everyone else out there who came educated and knowledgeable about how to actually help this person with their problem. Most of these people who want to do this are willing to have a couple missteps and still work with you. But if they have 3 companies come to them saying, we can help you hire formerly incarcerated people, or you should, and it's a horrible experience every time, they're only going to do that so much because they only have so much time. They're at work, they're employed to do their job. And if they can't be messing around doing something that's not successful. So that's why part of the understanding the business case is so important, because that's what they're employed to do, is to grow their business, find the people they're looking for so they can get back to work. So having a real solution is a big part of it, right? You need to actually be able to solve their problem. You don't want to go get 100 companies to say, okay, I've met with you 3 times. Yes, I'll do fair chance hiring, second chance hiring. And then you have one person that's looking for a job and you convinced 100 people to do it. So we're uniquely in this position of, we have an employment marketplace. So we have to match supply and demand. If we have 500 employers, but we only have 100 job seekers, all the employers will leave. If we have 20,000 job seekers and no employers, all the job seekers will leave. So it's a pain point that's very unique to us, but I think it's also healthy to know, if I have a small pool of job seekers, I only need 2 employers to work with me to potentially help all of them find a stable job. So I think that's important, is be patient, prove one milestone at a time. Like, I'm going to work with this employer, and then I'll work with 2 employers, and then I'll work with 3. I think it's good for your business or your organization if you take that approach, rather than saying, hey, everyone in Kentucky or everyone in Texas, we can help you. Taking that kind of prove one before you do the second model. The other one that we've learned over time is having high standards for your organization, for the job seekers you work with, and for the employers. We didn't have super high expectations for our employers at first. We were just thankful that they were willing to consider people. But then we realized some of these employers are giving us not very good explanations for why they decided not to hire someone. And they're doing things that maybe we just don't think are right. So we actually would just say, hey, we're actually not going to work with you anymore because we really worked hard with this job seeker. We worked hard, the job seeker worked hard, and then the employer was falling short. And that equation can work either way. If you're running a nonprofit and your employees aren't engaged, they're not responding to emails for 7 days while a candidate's supposed to have an interview, they're not going to get the job if they, aren't engaged. So I think it's just having a high standard for everyone that's a part of the equation can really help, right? It's the quality over quantity is really important. And the very last thing I wanted to say was the third strategy, I guess, also falls on being knowledgeable. Dennis was pointing out that really helping employers understand the barriers that the people are struggling with, really understanding the barriers your client's struggling with before you try to connect them to a job. Dennis, I took a screenshot of your matrix there. I love that. But also, like, we help people get hired at a few tech companies making 60, 70 grand a year who just got out of prison 3 months ago, right? So being able to share barriers, but also not spreading a broad brush across everyone who has a record, because there are 20% of our database are people with bachelor's degrees. We have thousands of users who have bachelor's degrees. We have people that we've placed in salary positions, white collar jobs where they were highly qualified for the job they were applying for. But understanding, what does that look like? Like, how many people realistically are ready for that versus how many people are dealing with barriers? Those are my 3 tips, is just treat their time like it's gold, because it is. They won't give you a lot of their time if you waste it. Have high standards for your team, the job seekers and the employers, and then just be as knowledgeable as you can before you go into the discussion with an employer. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley. And thank you, Dennis and Brittany, too, for what you added into the contributions of that conversation. And I think this is a great segue. So each of you kind of brought up different challenges that you face. And I was going to ask you a question about what are some of the main challenges your organizations face with engaging with employers. We already heard Harley say about organizations who came before, who maybe created unequal opportunities for businesses that come after based off of the way that they represented reentry. Dennis talked about barrier reduction, and Brittany talked about how you need to have a clear communication plan. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick opportunity. I'm going to do a quick round robin here to keep us on track, starting with Brittany, going to Dennis, and then Harley. What other challenges have you faced when working with employers and making sure you're really engaged with them?
I'll narrow it down to 3 things. 1, having misaligned values and goals. 2, bandwidth and capacity to hit the ground running. And then 3, entry point. So going back to number 1, you really need to find the right partners for the value proposition that you're offering as a community service provider. Mainly because it's not so much that, it's about like a purity contest. It's more about finding the right niche. And really understanding where you can provide the most value. There are a lot of service providers out there and community-based organizations that are in the same realm, but perform very different functions. So really finding your niche and being able to speak to that is incredibly important. The bandwidth and capacity piece, again, being transparent about what you'll need up front to be successful. Oftentimes that's capital, and we can get into that later on in this panel if we have some time, but really being upfront about what it's going to take to reach the milestones that you're discussing with employers. 1, to make sure they're on board, but also to give them a chance to tap into some of the resources and networks that you may have that can better support some of the milestones that they're trying to achieve. And then lastly, the entry point piece. I mentioned audience earlier, but it's also the audience within a business or corporation. So sometimes you need to find the right folks that are looking to achieve similar milestones as you. So whether that's working with, the chief diversity officers or working with folks on the HR team or the operations team in key regions, really finding the right entry point so you can establish some credibility and gain momentum. I'm going to kick it back to you, Jennifer.
It wouldn't be a session with Jennifer Lynch. If you know me well, sometimes that mute button just gets the best of me. Dennis is smiling because he's experienced it so many times. But with that, Dennis, go ahead. What are some challenges you've seen with employers when you're working towards engagement?
I apologize about the sun decided to shine in my window. It's blinding me back there, right in my screen. So if that's affecting but anyway, so two things that I want to talk about is I think that one of the issues is there are still a lot of arcane HR policies, policies that were developed maybe 50 or 60 years ago that just don't fit in the times that we're in and do not fit with the labor market that we have now. So in particular, hiring matrices that employers have on occasion are just absurd. They don't match, they don't match their needs, and they're not relevant to the current times. And to illustrate kind of what I mean, I just really quickly share a story that when I first started, not first, but shortly after, we had a job fair. And at least 3 or 4, it might have been 5 individuals left with jobs that were all paying over $20 an hour. Super excited. The way that we advertised that job fair was as a second chance job fair. They started the job 2 weeks later. When the background check came back, they all got fired. So I learned my lesson, and that kind of goes into what I said, is that all employers have a different definition of what second chance is. And so I learned that you can't take an employer's word for it, because second chance to some employers might mean we hire people with misdemeanors only. It might mean we hire people after they are 7 years removed from a conviction. It might mean we hire people after they're 5 years removed from a conviction. So to have that understanding clearly up front with an employer, what do you mean when you say that you're second chance? You might not want to advertise that to the public in general. You might not want to post on a website that you're second chance. But before I can send somebody to you and match an employee to you, I have to have a clear and precise definition of what you mean when you tell me that you're a second chance employer.
Thank you, Dennis. That is so true. And we see that so frequently across the Goodwill network. Getting that, and if you look at reentry services as an industry, we struggle so much with clarification and definitions and people's interpretations. It's something I speak about a lot, about our need to be concise and clear and to get that same information back from all of our partners, not just employers. But with that, Harley, you want to wrap us up on this question. Of course, you always have a unique perspective, but what are some challenges you face when you deal with employers?
Yeah. So, what Dennis said is probably the number one, is companies come to us interested in learning, but then when you tell them, I have people I can send you, but they have one or more of one of these like 20,000 different convictions, right? There's so many different types of words that could come back on that background check. And most of the hiring managers, even the HR team, don't actually know what any of it means, right? They have a process that they're not usually familiar with. Maybe single location or small businesses have more of a hold on it. But this is what the technology Jennifer briefly talked about was in our platform, is it actually takes your location, your job description, and knows what crimes should disqualify a candidate and what crimes shouldn't based on the job description and the location. We're just following like the EEOC guidelines and applicable laws. So employers really like working with us because we say anyone you get from us, you can rest assured that like you're not going to be putting yourself at risk of a lawsuit. However, they still are a little worried. They want to talk through it. And to Dennis's point, clarity is so important, because not only will a job seeker's life be hurt really bad when they're on their 3rd week of getting paid $20 an hour and then they get fired for something that they didn't really do anything wrong, but also that employer may never want to work with you again because they had to fire 3 people and they were like, what an awful experience that was. What an awful, so clarity of policy is huge. So I just want to double down on that. The last thing I'll say has nothing to do with employers. It has everything to do with being a formerly incarcerated person. I'm sorry to everyone on the call from DOC, but DOC could do a whole lot better. Like our government needs to step it up. Like people in Illinois, I just read, that are coming home now, they have an ID. Everyone should be coming home with a state issued ID. Why are we putting people on the street when they don't have I came home without a social security card, birth certificate, or ID. It took me months to get all that. And it's like, the expectation that we hold our government accountable to is very low. And I don't appreciate it personally, but I'm also, that's not the business I'm in, is changing policy and budgets and who's in charge. So I wish there was more education for people before they came home. I wish they were able to hit the ground running, because that would make it a lot easier for employers to say yes if they were being offered candidates that, were ready. To Dennis's point, a lot of times they have these barriers that they maybe don't really need to have, but they do, because that's unfortunately the state we're in as a country. So I'm sorry to end on such a negative tone. I just want to throw that out there, that we can always do better for the people before they get out. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley. And I think that's to the nature of employer engagement and thinking about partnerships, because there's a lot that many of the organizations on the call today can do in regards to assisting with those and helping change the way that we look at antiquated practices, right? The issue with the ID is not unique to you. It's not unique to Illinois. It is something we experience across the nation. In my experience with all the Goodwills we work with, having basic identification documentations are required for employment, and we're setting up people for challenges if we're not having them leave prepared. So just really, if you are a member of a law enforcement agency, would love to encourage you to partner with some of our community-based organizations that are here today. I know that there's many of us who'd love to step up and fill those holes for you. So Harley, you may think that was a little bit negative. I'm going to turn it into a positive, because wherever there's a negative, there's always opportunity for improvement. But as we're talking about antiquated processes, Dennis, you brought up antiquated HR policies. Some of the challenges that you've had with employers who have policies and procedures set up that really create barriers to helping people be successful. Would you be able to share an experience with us where you were working with a company or an employer that you engaged with, where you helped transform their hiring practices or change their policies in regards to it?
Absolutely. I'm going to use our most recent experience of General Electric. So we've been working with GE recently. We have a ramp up, what we call the ramp up program to GE, to participants through our Goodwill process, soft skills, good start and rise, and then job shadow to GE, or internal, working at Goodwill no less than 90 days, where they also get soft skills, and then on to GE. But that was a process to get that done, Jennifer. And it started because General Electric is one of the largest employers in Louisville. They have 500 open jobs right now and a terrible turnover rate. In the next 2 years, they're going to be adding they're expanding, adding an additional 1,000 jobs. So to an extent, the timing was right, because they became desperate. So when they become desperate, they're more willing to work with us. So when they came to us, what we were able to do is share our hiring matrix with their head of HR. So Pam Brown, who leads HR for Goodwill Industries of Kentucky and is our director, had multiple meetings with their HR lead, and we were able to make their matrix look a little bit more like Goodwill's matrix. And that's amazing, because our hiring matrix is wide open. We're Goodwill. We are a second chance employer, probably the biggest second chance employer in Kentucky. We weren't able to get it to where I would like to see it, as to be wide open, but we changed, on a hiring matrix: red, non-hireable; green, yes; yellow, maybe. And we were able to change a lot of that red to green. And that's spectacular, because what that did then was open up this experience for us that we're calling our ramp to GE. So once they go through the Goodwill process, they take a drug test with us. We make sure they fit on the matrix. And if they're an employee, send them to work at Goodwill for 90 days. If they're not an employee, if they're an external person, not an internal Goodwill employee, we have added that job shadow component, because what I think is so important with justice involved individuals and people who need a second chance is you can't give somebody a job and expect them to go to this large company on the first day and show up and be comfortable. So to decrease the likelihood that people just wouldn't show up at all that first day, I want a career coach to go out there with them, show them GE, and then let GE kind of let them watch what's going on at that, at the plant. They have their own onboarding process, but I just think it's so important that they get introduced to the company that they're going to work for, ahead of time with somebody they're comfortable with, because a lot of times new places and new activities cause great anxiety for people, especially second chance individuals. Grocery stores are like that as well, and employers are no exception. So a lot of the people that you get jobs for would not even show up the first day if they weren't introduced ahead of time to the employer. So I think that job shadow component and just taking them out there to see the factory, which, by the way, Appliance Park, where GE is at in Louisville, is like a little city in and of itself. It's huge. So you could get dropped off at one end and maybe you're a mile and a half away from where you're supposed to be. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it is that big. It's overwhelming and it's intimidating. So I think that was a necessary component of having this transformational relationship with GE. And what we've built out, it's not complicated. You can do this. You just have to find the right moment and the right time to approach the employer when they're desperate enough. And when you've got a good enough process to provide them with a good employee, then the time is right and you need to approach them. Talk about the mutual benefits, the benefits that Goodwill is getting out of it for the second chance participants, the benefits that GE is getting out of it. And as I've said a couple of times on here, I think that the catch of making somebody sustainable by us sticking with that person and being able to help GE address barriers is key to that. Because I think it was, I don't know if it was Brittany or Harley that mentioned that, it doesn't really do any good you can't ruin that relationship before it starts by sending people who aren't ready to work that are going to be gone in a day or two. If that would happen, this relationship would be over before it started. So we got to be careful in what we do.
Dennis, thank you so much. And a component of what you said there is the time is now. We're all familiar with the terminology, or should be, of the Great Resignation. And that's created a lot of opportunities for the individuals that we serve through our community-based organizations. But we also have to recognize that having our hearts in the right places sometimes isn't enough. You need resources, and resources come from funders. And so how I'm going to segue into this next question that I have for Brittany, and then this is going to be our final question, and we're going to get to all of your questions and answers, is, Brittany, how can funders play a role in helping organizations that are committed to building and developing long-term relationships with employers? And what role should employers play in investing in these organizations?
Another great question, Jennifer. To jump right in, I would say when awarding organizations and service providers grants, funders can opt for less restrictions on how the capital is used to achieve agreed upon milestones. We're in the early stages of this new frontier in this space, and there are some uncharted waters that we can learn from that will inform future practices and methodologies. That said, organizations operate at a higher level of efficacy when we can adapt and pivot. So the more funders make space for these pivots, the more quickly we can all learn and do better at making an impact. Funders can also act as connectors between service providers and community stakeholders that have goals and that are mission aligned. Funders should be willing to fund beyond the early phases of a project to give community partners and service providers a chance to iterate the best solutions to the challenges that we all seek to eliminate. This process being iterative is one of the greatest benefits of the work early on, is that we're able to quickly adapt to changes in the market and have solutions and systems that can support those adaptations. As it relates to employers, really, large corporations and employers at large can help bring about radical change in communities by being willing to pay for the services and expertise administered by CBOs in the same ways they pay for professional consultant services. A fair market rate will enable CBOs to operate with greater speed and confidence, which will ultimately lead to greater outcomes for the individuals that we are serving. Employers can also really tap into the frameworks and seriously examine the HR policy and practice suggestions that are made by experts in this space, because that ultimately pave the way for more equitable hiring practices. One of the greatest benefits of this work is the positive externalities that come out of it. Oftentimes, the changes affect other marginalized groups of folks that suffer from systemic employment barriers, which is another major value proposition for investing in organizations that can deliver on these objectives. So I'm gonna actually kick it back to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, Brittany, thank you so much for that. And I'm going to get started with a really quick question just because we have your attention right now. A question came in from Robert. Back earlier, you were discussing about the certification for HR professionals available to your employees at CEO. He was curious, is that available beyond CEO? And is there an opportunity to maybe share more information about that in the chat pod?
Absolutely. There's, I believe it was Harley that kind of touched base on it. And my colleague, Ken Brickman, is doing a lot of work right now, good work in the Q&A box, in the chat box. But, we worked with SHRM to develop some tools that getting talent back to work. That portal has been pivotal in really trying to help connect intermediaries with different resources and experts in this space to help widen the pathways for career opportunities for folks who are justice impacted. And so we can share some resources either as a follow-up to this webinar and then also in the chat box. But I would definitely say tapping into the resources we have with getting talent back to work. There are different types of other like assessments that CBOs and other service providers can take. I'll share a couple of links to some that we support and promote in some of the work that we're doing. But ultimately really understanding where you stand is the first start. That's where you should start in any situation. And I think moving forward, we're going to see more tools that are levied as resources to really help set the landscape for future work in this space.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for taking on that question. Harley, we're going to go ahead and transition to you. There's a tremendous number of questions in the chat pod and the Q&A in regards to honest jobs. So you have definitely piqued individuals' interests here. One common request is if there's a flyer. I know that a couple times we've put the link in the chat pod, and I'll be sure once Harley starts addressing some of these questions that I take some time to put it in again for you. But one of the most common questions that we're seeing is honest jobs more of an aggregator, or do you make direct referrals to open positions? If you're doing direct referrals, how does this work with candidates? How do you work with candidates to prepare them for on-the-job success? And you're muted, Harley.
Yeah. So it's a really great question. What Honest Jobs is trying to do is not an easy task. It's extremely difficult. Think about Uber, Airbnb, Indeed, any of these marketplace models where you're trying to attract what's called market liquidity. Is we need employers, when they ask a question, a job seeker responds. When a job seeker asks a question, an employer responds. And we started as a business, it was just me working with one employer, and I was working with a local facility, getting one person hired at a time. What I eventually did was I raised investment. So I got some investors to invest on the social enterprise model of impact. We're going to help recapture $77 billion a year in lost earnings back to people who need it the most. So I have really great investors who cared about the mission. And what we've done is we've changed our model a few times, but not because it was wrong, but because we had to think about it in a multi-step process. So early on, we were trying to build an algorithm that could help you predict how likely you are to get hired if we had a job description in a location. So there's a lot of technology behind our solution. We're trying to create something that everyone with a criminal record can use while we only have, probably less than 100 employees at scale. So what we did at first was we were pulling in jobs from ZipRecruiter and Indeed, millions of jobs. So we'd have jobs everywhere. If you came to our site with a record, we would have jobs, but we didn't know if they were second chance or not. But what we knew was based on completely unbiased, based on the job description and location, how confident are we that your criminal record is going to stop you from being able to get the job? And based on that data, large amounts of data, we would rank the jobs in order of how likely we believe you are to get hired. And we saw a lot of early success. People were saying, wow, the second interview I did with you guys, I got hired. I've been rejected 50 times this year. So although we haven't done an institutional study with university, we have lots of data saying that we can get people hired 6-7 times faster. Since we created that technology, we've been building direct relationships with employers. So now we have over 600,000 job listings where the employer actually has an account with us and they've posted that job. when someone applies, they're applying with that employer through us the same way they would apply with that employer through Indeed. The only difference is the employer knows they came from honest jobs. And so they know they have some type of criminal history, and they know that our technology did some work. So the employer knows there's a good chance I'm not going to have to reject this person based solely on the crime they're convicted of. Doesn't mean there's going to be 100% match. People are still going to get rejected. It could be because they didn't interview very well. It could be because of the crime. But what we're seeing is most of the time it's not because of the crime. All that being said, we have transitioned away from aggregating jobs online. There's still a few in like really rural areas because it just makes for a better job seeker experience if there's 20 jobs rather than 2. But in major metro cities all across the country, we have dozens of employers in major metro cities with hundreds, if not thousands of jobs in major metro cities. We have about 10 companies that we do direct placement for. And this is where we make our money is they ask us for wraparound support and services where we have a recruiter that recruits for them. We place the candidate. They're on your payroll from day one, but we check in with them weekly. We do weekly mentorship calls. We provide, if they need help with housing, transportation, finance, we can connect them with resources, and we'll do our best to make sure that they stay for 60 or 90 days and that there's a smooth transition. So we're only doing that with about 10 employers right now. We're planning to up that to about 50 by the end of next year. We're actively hiring recruiters internally. And again, I think I've said it, but 11 of our 15 employees have felony convictions. Our software team, our recruiters, our sales team, our executives. So we're very proud of that. And hopefully that answered the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harley. You actually answered multiple questions, so you made my job a little bit easier there. Lots of questions for Harley in the chat pod. So Harley, maybe in the last couple of minutes, if you don't mind just seeing if there's anything we didn't catch that you could answer directly. There is a question in the chat pod, if maybe you, in the Q&A pod, if you could answer about your retention rates and how you mitigate turnover. But for our last question, I want to head over to Dennis for a minute. And Dennis, keep in mind, we got about 2 minutes remaining before we close out. There is an interesting question about preparing people who have substance use issues for work in areas that traditionally have a lot of substance use in them. And how do you help participants navigate those when you know that they have these new skills available, but you're also sending them back into a community that could really reignite the trauma or behaviors that led to substance use in the beginning?
That's a bad match, Jennifer, what I would call that. So we try to steer away from that. I just use the restaurant industry as an example of that. You have a substance abuse issue, the restaurant industry is not the place for you. I've had close personal friends that one was a chef and went back and relapsed and did it again and went back and relapsed because he wouldn't go into another field. And so I understand that might be your passion, but your number one priority is you staying clean. Because if you don't stay clean, nothing else is going to work. And you can't stay clean by going back to the same environment that you've always been in. So I'm going to answer 2 questions, kind of, Jennifer, and how we deal with that. There was another question in here about how the staff is trained in dealing with justice-involved individuals. But the same thing goes for people with substance abuse. So one of the main things that we're doing now is everybody is getting peer support certified. So everybody is going through that 40-hour session, taking the test, and all the staff on the reentry team is peer support certified. We're also developing a reentry certification that is going to be a combination of the regular peer support and another week that addresses barriers specific to justice-involved individuals. We also do trauma training for the staff, because mental health and well-being, when you're working in this job, it's the staff and the participants that need that training to stay healthy. And then DE&I training has been a big thing this year, but I really like the peer support aspect that we've added, because the mentorship of hiring people that have life experience to do this work is so important. I think the whole staff doesn't need to have life experience, but Harley just mentioned that, and I preach it all the time. If you don't, at least you've got to be passionate about it, for sure, if you don't have the life experience, but have some people on your staff that have life experience to do this work, because those are the people that are best suited to mentor and lead the other people onto the right path. They've been through it. They're a good example. And I want to point out, Jennifer, before we end, that nothing that I'm I keep it simple kind of person. So everybody wants to start reentry programs, and it's a hot topic right now, and you want to do this, but it's not complicated. It's common sense. It's getting the right people involved. And it's just knowing what you're doing. It's not hard to do, so worthwhile that I wish that all of the Goodwill organizations had a robust reentry program. Maybe we'll get there one day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dennis. Oh, what a great note to end on. For all of those who are looking at Dennis and Harley and Brittany and see what they've been able to build through their organizations, like, just here's a message of hope. Dennis has been doing this for 4 years. I was there from the beginning. He started with not a lot, and he's been able to build this tremendous network of services in Kentucky for so many people. Harley, I'm not sure the exact year that your organization started, but look at what he's been able to build. And CEO may have a long legacy, but they also started somewhere. So if there's an opportunity for you out there, don't hesitate to take it, and to also help improve the second chance community. With that, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Dennis, Brittany, Harley. Your time is important. It's valuable. We are so grateful for you choosing to spend it with us on this Friday afternoon. But I also need to take a minute to just introduce what our next topic is going to be. So here's a quick notice. Save this date. We will be coming back on March 4th, 2022, everyone. I can't believe it's next year already. Same time, 1 o'clock Eastern time, where we will be discussing about economic mobility for people impacted by the justice system. We will be sharing out more information to come, but please save that date. We're looking forward to seeing you again. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We know your time's important, and we appreciate your opportunities for putting us together to learn. Here is all of our contact information. So if you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Harley, Brittany, or Dennis. And one last thank you to our panelists. They did an excellent job, and we look forward to seeing you in March. Have a happy and healthy New Year, everyone.